Welcome everybody to day 4 of the Africa Health R&D Week. We have gone through 3 other days where our emotions have dipped and picked as we looked at the reality of our not being accountable with our finances for health R&D. And then we also were acknowledging the debt burden and its impact on our ability to invest in health R&D. But yesterday we picked up a bit as we spoke about and we considered how to unlock the resources that are in the private sector. And today we are going to go into a very exciting and interesting conversation about global health equity and decolonizing health R&D so that we can have more equity in the research in Africa. As usual, I'm going to hand over to John Mead, my colleague and friend from IAVI, who's going to then tell us how we're going to have this discussion as we usher in some very powerful keynotes and very, very powerful and thought-provoking conversations with our advocates. Over to you, John.
Thank you so much, and good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are logging in from. We made it to the last day of Africa Health R&D Week, right? We made it through accountability of governments. We made it through a conversation about debt burden. We made it through a conversation about innovative strategies for domestic resource mobilization. And today, it is a very important topic because all of this, all of investment in health, investment in HIV, the overarching theme or the kind of elephant in the room is inequities, right? It is the topic of colonization. And today we will hear from powerful speakers who will talk about why decolonizing the research and development pipeline, the research and development enterprise is crucial for advancement of global health equity, right? It is crucial that we talk about this topic. Some people shy away from this topic, right? Shy away from talking about the impacts of colonization, the impacts of racism, the impacts of inequities on investing in domestic resource mobilization and in research, right? So this topic is crucial in order to decolonize and to achieve global health equity. As we talked about, as we know, vaccine equity, right? Vaccine apartheid has been a budding conversation. Manufacturing capacity. Can you hear me? Someone is saying that I can't hear.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. All right, just making sure, so this is a very important topic and we thank you for coming here and joining us. Some of you for the 4th day. Thank you for sticking with us. And this is a very important topic that we need. My name is, I didn't even introduce myself. My name is John Mead. I was so excited about the topic. My name is John Mead and I'm the Senior Program Manager for IAVI. IAVI is an organization that works to ensure the ethical development and the equitable distribution of HIV prevention tools with an overarching goal of achieving global health equity. We also work with a coalition of partners, including IAVI and WACI Health and others that in the CASPER Coalition, the Coalition to Accelerate and Support Prevention Research. And we're happy that you're here. Next slide. But before we start, as I mentioned before, conversations about decolonization and white supremacy culture and racism are hard topics to talk about, right? And sometimes avoided, right? So we want to come to this space with some community agreements, right? Because we want this to be a respectful dialogue. We want this to be a productive dialogue. We do not want people shouting at each other, right? So the first community agreement is aim to understand and connect We might not have all the same perspectives and life experiences. We do not have the same perspectives and life experience. So aim to understand and connect. Be present and listen with respect. Speak in I statements, right? Speak with your own lived experience. Participate. So step up if you are someone who's usually quiet and fade into the background, or step back if you're someone who is always in the forefront. Be brave, vulnerable, open, and authentic. Hold grace for yourself and others, right? If you're providing a comment, no need to be perfect. We give you permission to have grace, to give yourself grace, but also to speak in first draft, right? And remain open-minded, respect differing opinions, listen thoughtfully to one another's stories. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Peter, who will take us on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John and Ethel. My name is Peter Weganjo. My name is written down there. So I lead the CREED, which is a coalition of partners, an advocacy platform for health R&D. And I have the pleasure of introducing the team that has been able to work tirelessly to make sure that the fourth day is exciting and informative, not saying that the first 3 days have been very insightful and very good. So we have John, who has just spoken. John, thank you for always being the first one and introducing and, setting the pace. We also have Maureen Awol, who is my colleague. Maureen is a coordinator for CREED, which is a coalition for health research and development. The third one is myself, and I'll move to Julian Rashid, who works for GHTC, which is Global Health Technologies Coalition, and also Sharon 10 from the 10 Global Consulting Firm, I believe. So this is a team that has worked over the 4 days. We've participated in the first 3 days, and they've been insightful. And today we hope to close with a bang. And yes, and I will hand it over. Sorry, I will move to the next slide. If you can move to the next slide. Yes, so we will start by first defining what global health research and development is. And this is a translation of an idea or discovery into a product, such as a vaccine, a drug, diagnostic, or other device that addresses a health need that disproportionately affects people living with low resource settings. I hope that shed some light as we start this, but I believe that's not new to you. But at this juncture, I hand it over to my colleague, Julian.
I believe it's over to me, Peter, thanks. Hey everyone, Julian here. So just briefly, super excited to hear from our speakers today. Before we hear from them, we just wanted to do a small exercise to get to know our audience. So I'm going to be sharing a tool. It's going to be a live polling tool called Mentimeter. Some of you might have used it before. So let me shift over to that. Okay, so this is just a live polling tool, and we just have 2 questions on this poll. So you could ask everyone on your web browser, on your phone if you want to scan this QR code, but to go to www.menti.com. And once you go there, you should be able to enter this code. Let me also copy the link into the chat as well. So we ask you to join. We'll just be asking 2 short questions. It should only take about a minute each. I see we're getting some hearts. I'm going to go to the next page, and you should still be able to log in though. So no worries if you haven't gotten there yet. Okay, our first question is about where you're calling in from. So we'd love to see where everyone's from. We got SA, I'm assuming that's South Africa, United States. I thought this would be a fun exercise. Okay. Ghana, Angola, Kenya. Great. I'll give this about 30 seconds. And again, if you're just joining, you should be able to log on to this Menti poll by going to www.menti.com, and you can enter in this code. Oh, and someone is asking what's the code again. It's 59504030. Thanks, Sharon, for sharing the link. If you click on that link, it should be able to take you to this as well. Okay. So we got some responses coming in. We're at 22. I think we're going to be able to hit 30. Okay. Well, we're slowing down, so I think it'll take us to the next question. And this is our last question. So this question's a bit bigger, and so we ask that you limit your word count, I think, to challenge us all to think about this and what is most important to us. And I want to note this is a very big question. So in 2 to 5 words, what does decolonization mean to you? Again, this is a very complex question. I think it's very multi-pronged. I think people might be coming from very different perspectives on this. We were interested to see what people's thoughts were. Okay, so we're seeing equity, empowerment of Black people, empowering disadvantaged communities, freedom, justice, self-sufficient and independent. I believe this should scroll once we get enough responses. Reparations, dismantling, unlearning equity, justice, anti-racism. I'm sorry, everyone, I thought this would scroll, but maybe, oh, there we go, I can scroll. Removing a crime against humanity. Eliminate the role of colonial powers or influence in the rights and plans of other countries. Non-discrimination. Liberation, independent, freedom, dignity, the death of white supremacy, Black Lives Mattering, emancipation, communities determining their own futures, returning power to formerly colonized nations through empowerment and reparations, stepping out of the way and allowing people to take charge of their affairs, creativity and more freedom. Let go the shackles of colonial power, dismantling white supremacy. Great. No local program led from the US or EU. So I think I will end this here, but this has been, I think, a really helpful exercise, again, to see this term can mean a lot to a lot of different people. And so I think we'll be exploring a lot of those perspectives today, and I'm sure the speakers will be giving us, touching on many of these topics or views in their remarks. So super excited to hear from them, and let me not hold us up any longer. So I'm going to hand it back over to my colleague Maureen, but give me one sec while I switch back to the slides. Okay, Maureen, over to you.
Thank you, Julian. My name is Maureen from CREED. CREED is an advocacy coalition for health research and development hosted under AMREF Health Africa in Kenya. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote, who is Professor Agnes Binagwaho. She currently resides in Rwanda and is the retired Vice Chancellor and co-founder of the University of Global Health Equity, which focuses on changing how healthcare is delivered around the world by training global health professionals who strive to deliver more equitable, quality health services for all. From 1996 to 2016, Professor Binagwaho provided clinical care in the public sector and served the Rwandan health sector in high-level government positions. First, as the Executive Secretary of Rwanda's National AIDS Control Commission, and then as the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health, and lastly, as the Minister of Health for 5 years. She specializes in emergency pediatrics, neonatology, and treatment of HIV/AIDS. Allow me to welcome Professor Binagwaho. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for this kind presentation. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are in the world. It is my pleasure to be here today as part of this first ever Africa Health R&D week to discuss decolonization of global health and the real roots of the problem. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Next slide. We can go directly to the next one, yes. So the term decolonization was first defined by a German economist, Moritz Julius Born, as the process by which countries achieve self-governance. It was used to describe the political phenomenon of independence and associate with the creation of self-governing nation states. Later, historians argue that the definition of this term was broadened to cover the elimination of all the consequences of colonial experience, be it political, cultural, economic, or psychological. In fact, it was later used to refer to the removal of the supremacies and privileges that are manifestation of the legacy of the colonialism and are linked to geography and skin color and culture, knowing that the major colonizers were from Europe at the beginning. However, the causes and effect relationship need to be seriously analyzed and reframed. Acts of colonization per se are the product of a mindset that allow Europeans to justify colonialism, enslavement, appropriation of land of other nations because they have another color of the skins and other culture, diversion of wealth from colonies and destruction of culture and history of those populations to disenfranchise colonized population and create a global false narrative to justify this action to come and steal on the pretext to come and bring civilization, as if, for example, in Africa, we didn't have civilization. The continent where the first ever universities existed. Remember Alexandria and remember Timbuktu. Next slide. There is a clear link between Western and white supremacy. The origin of this supremacy is based on geography. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Europe colonized Asia, Africa, Oceania, and America. This was done by countries that are now considered as the Western world. The link here is that the majority of white people live in this Western world. Initially, this was Europe, but it extended to part of the world where Europeans migrated and took the land. It's now in North America and Oceania. Note, this is because they invade those lands and kill the native communities where they colonized new land. Next slide. Now I would like to look at ways in which the Western supremacy mindset is cultivated. First, We have formal and informal education system. What we learn at home, what we learn at school. We are taught from the first drop of milk that Black is the color of negativity through racist example and theories. Additionally, our understanding of history is biased as colonizers altered and reduced African history to the time during and after the colonization. But we, as Africa and the rest of the world, we need to make sure that we play our part in challenging this false narrative and brought to light the history of Africa for the last 2,000 years. What is not done enough? Next slide. We also have the use of language that help perpetuate this Western supremacy mindset. For instance, the word Caucasian invokes scientific racism and biological race given the origin of the term. In the 18th century, light-skinned people from Caucasus region were identified as the superior race. Equivalent from other races are negative, like we have Mongolian for Asian, Negroid for Africa. And note that in the US, police says Caucasian in crime reports, but they don't say white American or European American, where they say Black and African American. Next slide. The word adopt a single story for the Black people, despite the huge diversity. This reduces our different culture, language, and histories. It also removes the opportunity to think that we can provide more tailored solutions. We are different, we have different culture. Next. We are continuously told that Africa is receiving money from the Western world, that they are there to help us. But in fact, we should consider that low and middle-income countries are the one helping the rich countries. If we analyze the flow of money, there is expatriate profit, and also there is a brain drain that counts for an average of 42 billion US dollars that are extracted every year from Africa for the rich world in natural resources or in brain drain, human resources. So the question is, who help who? Because more money, more resources come from Africa to the rich world than the contrary. Next. Dissemination channel also count, like peer-reviewed journal we all read as our Bible. And also conferences play a great role in cultivate this Western supremacy mindset. On the left, you have a journal that has no author from a low and middle-income country, but talk about low and middle-income country and got nearly 700 citations since the publication in 2020. On the right, you can see an article written by 19 authors, 16 of them are from Africa, talking about what happened in Africa, and published during the same period and got only 56 citations. Just because we were all told, and we continue to be told, that what is done in high-income countries has more value than what is done in low and middle-income countries. If we are to challenge the Western supremacy mentality, we need also to correct this bias that maintain and cultivate that those ideas in peer-reviewed journal and in academia that give more credit to high-income countries' scientists, even when they don't do the work. Next slide. The expectation to publish in English and met the requirement of journal published in the global north contribute to the northern ventriloquism. This notion has been developed by Professor Tirusha Naidu from South Africa. Northern ventriloquism occurs when low and mid-income country scholars enunciate high-income countries' ideas, not because it is the right things to do, but because it's the only way to access global competitive grants or access to high-level journals. Perpetuating the white supremacy mindset that way is inevitable. Conditional high-income country scholarship have the same results by using their position to dictate structure and set priority for the content, relevance, and timing of research and publication. Next. The disproportionate representation of low and mid-income countries in leadership position also caused by and contribute to this Western supremacy mindset. 75% of leadership positions in global health are held by high-income countries, even though they only represent 17% of the global population. Note that where these programs are based impact the content as they create content based on their history and what they know and what they fight for. Next. As academia is home to most research done in global health, it is important that we discuss how global is really global, how global health education is. According to a study published by the BMJ, the world academic capital of global health is locked in rich countries, with 88% of global health master program located in high-income countries. These courses are often inaccessible for those in low-income countries because of visa or because of the cost. Next. Now we need to ask the question, what are the implications of the Western supremacy mindset for how we conduct our professions? In global health practice, there is the expectation that knowledge is essentially and only sometimes generated by high-income countries. There is also the unwillingness to learn from low and mid-income countries. For instance, low and mid-income countries controlled the COVID-19 pandemic better than high-income countries before the existence of vaccine during that year. But there was no willingness to learn from them. Also, in research and partnership, there were no, when I say that for COVID, they found excuse, is because it's hot, so the virus survived less. That's how Africa controlled the virus. After that, it was proven that in California, where it's hot, it's not the case. After that, even they went to say is because in Africa they are malnourished. So to recognize some achievement of low and mid-income countries, it's really hard for the establishment in high-income countries. So PI in research and partnership are expected to be the head of those partnerships from high-income countries. Funding is managed by them, and they select the area of the study regardless on how relevant it is for low and mid-income country. We also have issues of funding being provided to high-income country groups for low and mid-income country studies. Remember, 2 years ago, 30 million were given to a US NGOs to go and study malaria in Africa, as if in Africa we don't have experts of malaria. None of them were African. Lastly, we have what I call the Ertilan effect. Ertilan was one of my colleagues, now retired. He worked to create the Rwandan community-based health insurance, but he never published about it because his work didn't give him the opportunity to take the time to put that on paper. One day he gave his data to a Western expert who published about it and be recognized as the sole and unique expert in the community-based health insurance in Rwanda. Moreover, we have parachute research, which is the exploitation of the global south with little opportunity for professional growth for researchers in low and mid-income countries. This approach is also what we see in publication, in which the authorship is dominated by researchers from high-income countries, even for research done in low and mid-income countries. We can also take the example of the justice system in US and in America. We have more jail time for the same offense for Black people than for white people. Next slide. I would like now to look specially to global health practice and explore whether or not we are practicing what we put in our definitions. Next. For this presentation, I would like to give you the definition given by Copeland and colleagues for CUGH, the Consortium of University of Global Health, in the Lancet article, in their Lancet article. In this definition, there are 5 dimensions. We will start with geographical reach, where global health is defined to focus on health issues beyond national boundaries. Excuse me. But this is not the reality. We have seen during COVID-19 pandemic that countries have chosen to take a nationalistic approach and decided to race to an imaginary finish line alone with the wrong understanding that they could finish on their own. This was also the case in the 90s and early 2000 with the treatment against HIV and resistant TB. Next slide. Global health is also defined by global cooperation, but this again is not the case in reality. Remember, recently countries committed to COVAX to vaccinate globally 20% of the people at risk, meaning the vulnerable and the health professional across the world, as soon as there will be a vaccine against COVID-19. Remember that period. And when the first vaccine was available, the high-income country immediately vaccinate the population without keeping that promise. And for instance, Canada, they also stock vaccine, even if they have to throw in the dustbin those who were expiring in their stock. For instance, Canada secured 6 times the amount needed to vaccinate the entire population of Canada in the first quarter of 2021 and throw them in the dustbin. But they prefer that than to share with low and mid-income countries. They were unwilling to share IP rights. They are still opposing the TRIPS waiver recommended by South Africa and India because in the world there was not enough vaccine, so other countries could create the vaccine and protect the world. And also there were acts of piracy that were not really publicized, but US stole masks sent to Germany and ventilators that Barbados has bought and paid. They went on the tarmac of an airport and took the container. If it was a low-income countries who are doing that, they will be sanctioned immediately at all levels, up to the UN. But it was America. All this result in a difference of 40% point in the proportion of the population that were vaccinated and ready to be treated correctly due to, in case of needed due to the COVID pandemic. Next slide. Global health practice by definition need to embrace both prevention and clinical care, but this is not always the reality. There are repeated examples of the focus on screening rather than treatment in low and mid-income countries when treatment is provided by high-income countries. We can take the example of the fight against HIV. In the beginning, the IAVI were too expensive to follow in mid-income country. Remember also the class action, the lawsuit filed in February 1998 by 39 pharmaceutical company against the South African government for importing cheaper generic IAVIs done by Latino America. So big pharma prefer to let people die in low and mid-income country, but to protect their business. Next. This is to never forget that, because big pharma also create and discover their drugs with the support of taxes. That means with the support of the money of the people. But they do the profit alone. They don't share. And when it's a matter to save population, they fight against if they don't make profit. Global health practice needs to adopt an equity approach across and within nations. Let us take some example on how double standards are applied in treatment with substandard care provided to low and mid-income countries. We have WHO, early policy for multi-resistant TB, where the effective medicine were considered too expensive for patients from low and mid-income countries, and where the inefficient medicine were provided for MDR-TB, knowing that it was sentence of death for 50% of the people suffering of MDR-TB. We can also take the example of those who oppose HPV vaccine in Rwanda. Many claim that Rwanda needs to focus on infectious disease instead to prevention of non-communicable disease. This argument will never be made in high-income countries. Another example is the global encouragement of public health investment in Europe after the Second World War to rebuild the continent versus structural adjustment program in low and mid-income countries. Europeans knew that if you want to go for development, you need to rebuild and provide the capacity to produce, to manufacture. But in low and mid-income countries, they did the contrary. It's an extraction partnership. Lastly, we have terms such as cost effectiveness. A program is considered as cost effective based on the country GDP. So when you are from a poor country, spend on your health is a waste of money. Next. Lastly, we know that global health needs to be interdisciplinary to successfully address arising challenges. However, there is hesitance to incorporate biosocial science in health science education. Institutions prefer to promote faculty in one discipline, and there are unclear career routes for multidisciplinary approach when we know that in the real life, to solve problem, we need a multidisciplinary approach. Next slide. So what should we do? Individuals need to reflect on their conscious and inconscious bias. For instance, some institutions in high-income countries accept lower quality for low and mid-income countries. Unqualified young volunteers provide care in hospital in developing world. They had developing curricula and teaching students in school. We should not accept that. We have the infamous example of René Bach working for the US missionary organization, serving his children SH in Uganda, who had no qualification as a doctor or nurse and treated children, even do some surgery. She's responsible of 105 child deaths. This lady should be in jail for life. She's not. We also can see clear evidence of the white savior mentality, both at the individual and institutional level. Solutions are designed by those in the global north without the participation of leaders in the global south, with the expectation that the expertise only exists in the global north. If we want to truly decolonize global health, we need to start with decolonizing the way we think. This is the most important part as it impacts everything. How we carry our research and the partnership we build are just two examples among many. Next slide. At the institutional level, we need to reflect on our history and understand where we come from. Institutions in the global north were largely built on the back of enslaved people from Africa. Institutions also historically propagate anti-Blackness by, for instance, encouraging the study of scientific racism to justify colonialism and discrimination based on skin color. We also have health research that exploit Black community. For instance, remember the unethical nutrition experiment performed on Canada Aboriginal children at 6 residential schools between 1942 and 1952. And all this without consequences. They would have never done that with with children from white families. Next. We need to focus on building the skills and tools that leaders need to build and strengthen system through an accompaniment approach. And this is very important because we need to change the way healthcare is delivered across the world by training the next generation of healthcare providers to care for the vulnerable and provide quality care for all. We need to train students to not only be very qualified in clinical skills, they would need to treat patients, but also in biosocial approach, the need for adequate diagnosis and treatment is important, but the understanding of the context where the patient lives is as important. So we need to provide the student with management and leadership skills crucial to managing quality healthcare system and train them in rigorous research as well and to ensure that they help increase the capacity of the African continent to conduct and manage research. This is especially critical as we look toward developing our diagnostic, vaccine, and therapeutic capacity. But we also need to challenge the common historical narrative we are told about Africa. We know it is wrong, so we need to reevaluate how we teach it. We teach it to our children, but also to medical and global health students to make sure they understand the true context that they will work in. And this starts by knowing who we are, where we come from, and where we stand. Thank you. Looking forward for your questions.
Wow. Wow, thank you, Professor Binagwaho. I felt like you were walking us through a journey, like you were taking us through a journey. Thank you so much for that great presentation. You've been able to break it down for us, the definition of decolonization over time, cultivation of Western supremacy mindset at all levels, and what does it mean for our professions? You've also taken us through the definition versus reality. What do we define as global health practice and what is the reality? This is very eye-opening. And the question we ask ourselves is, are we truly practicing global health? Then you've also told us what we need to do. And so individuals need to reflect on their biases. Thank you for this presentation. And we'll be able to share the roundup later next week of this presentation and the recordings. So now I'll move on to our next phase, which will be a panel narrator, who is Leonard Solai. Leonard Solai is the Vice President, Product Access, External Affairs and Community Engagement at IPM South Africa. He's an affiliate of the Population Council. He leads the Product Access Program to ensure the first long-acting woman-controlled HIV prevention product, that's the Depivirin vaginal ring, is available and accessible to women where it's truly needed. Welcome, Leonard, for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Maureen, for the introduction, and I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Good afternoon and good morning, friends and comrades. I'm very excited and honored to be moderating this panel today, and especially after Prof. Agnes's excellent talk. This is which was really inspiring. The topic being addressed today is decolonizing the development, funding, and conduct of global health R&D. And I need to say that our panel today have lived through, worked in, fought against, and continue to do so in a global health space where many of these abhorrent practices that Prof. Binagwaho has so clearly pointed out still exist. So on that note, I want to provide a brief introduction to our panelists. Our first panelist is Yvette Raphael. Yvette is co-founder and executive director of Advocacy for Prevention of HIV and AIDS, known as APA in South Africa. Yvette is a human rights activist with a focus on people living with HIV, young women, and LGBTI communities. Yvette became involved in HIV when she was diagnosed in 2000, which was like 22 years ago. And Yvette continues to mentor, teach, and assist the next generation of powerful young advocates. And we've seen many of them coming through the ranks. And I'm sure all of you on this call know Yvette well as well. Our next speaker panelist is Dr. Nadia Sam Agudu. Dr. Nadia is a pediatrician and researcher focusing on infectious diseases that are inextricably linked with her goal to improve the health status of children living in resource-limited settings. To date, international research and global health experiences in Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, South Africa, and Peru as well have exposed Dr. Nadia to different contexts in the prevention and treatment of pediatric infectious diseases. And excitingly, she has recently published some of her experiences of racism in a Lancet publication, which I believe has been shared as well during this conference. Our next panelist is Dr. Alhaji Nyai, a scientist with a passion for education. Dr. Alhaji left Sierra Leone, his home country, to pursue a scholarship in the US, which also served to get him out of the country during the country's civil war. But in recent years, he's returned both to study Ebola and help educate the next generation of scientific talent there. In the last few years, his research work has further evolved in the fields of epidemiology, public health and anthropology, importantly, climate change, environmental health, and biosocial medicine as well. Our fourth panelist is Tian Johnson. Tian is a founder and lead of the African Alliance, queer advocate and member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee, or the MAC, on the COVID-19 vaccine in South Africa, mandated to develop a COVID-19 vaccine allocation framework for South Africa and provide recommendations, which was a leading body during the COVID epidemic in South Africa. Tian has for nearly 2 decades worked on a vast range of development areas with a track record of navigating and influencing policy and community. We've all worked with Tian before, and he always works from grassroots to grass tops. So I'd like to welcome the panel. These are really short introductions that I've done, and I'm sure I don't do justice to their work as well. And from the conversations, you will hear more about what they've done. So for this session, I've prepared 4 questions that I would like to pose to the panelists, and thereafter we will open up for some questions and for comments. You can also add your questions in the chat as well. So I thought it would be great to set the scene by starting on a personal note and asking our panelists if they could begin by briefly telling us about their role in the health R&D ecosystem where they work and how they've been impacted by the injustices in these systems, racism, and working in neo-colonial institutions. So I'm going to kick off by asking Yvette if she can address this question. Thank you, Yvette.
Okay. Thank you so much, Leonard. And for the first time, internally, I prepared myself and said, today, Yvette, you will not be nervous because this might be a turning point for decolonization globally and a part where the end of the talk shop starts. So for me, just a brief background, as you mentioned, I'm the executive director of APA. APA was founded in 2015, and we are an advocacy organization. Most of the work that we do is intentionally to decolonize in our spaces where we work and where we are. For me, first, it was to understand research. You know, when I was diagnosed, you mentioned it so early, you mentioned in your introduction, when I was diagnosed, first of all, I had to understand the role of research and science in my world, because we all remember the age of denialism. I don't want to reiterate that history, the age of denialism, the age of just denying science in South Africa. And my work and our work as APA was to demystify this fact that African research is mystical and often just food, herbs. We need to eat healthy. We are not deserving of science. We are not deserving of the science that we put our bodies to. And I mean, we saw how that panned out, and so many South Africans die. May their souls rest in peace. And that science was not good for you. Fast forward in 2020, we have to talk about the 2022, 2023. We have to talk about the impact and the contribution of Black bodies to science. It will be almost, criminal for us not to mention the impact of just Black bodies to science, the way it is described as something from the Western world. Decolonization for me means and looks like representation. We feel forced, and I'm so glad that Prof. Agnes mentioned it. We feel forced to write. However, historically, that is not how our research was told, how our history was told. Our history was narrated to us, and it was told, and from generations to generations, did we know and hear just how magical, how beautiful our ancestors and our forefathers was. And we have to look at it's either how the research landscape currently is, it's either we conform or fall. And either you write a paper, either you write a beautiful English paper to be acknowledged, first of all, by a university, to pat you on the back, to give you an accolade, to say, now currently you've made it, your research matters. And if we do not insist, I personally say, if we do not insist that our stories is the data, I say we are part of the problem and we are part of creating this decolonization that we say we want for. Thanks.
Thank you, Yvette.
This colonization, sorry.
No, thank you so much, and for that powerful opening comment as well. I would now like to turn to Dr. Nadia to also share with us about the impact of these injustices on her experiences and racism and working in colonial institutions as well. Over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Leonard. So I am a clinician scientist. My research is focused on infectious diseases that affect African children, and I generate evidence to guide clinical public health and health systems policy and practice for infectious diseases in children. And for me, even before I got into medical school, I wanted to root my medical practice and whatever research I did in our history and in our practices and in our context, whether by country or by ethnic group or by clan. And I wanted to practice a medicine and practice research and do research that was very African, very Africanized, you know, and I'm using, for lack of a better word, but we are not a homogeneous group. But then as I've gone through my career, I've realized that really to Africanize something is to decolonize it, because we spent so much time under colonization and even post-independence, so to speak, are still existing under very colonial structures and very colonial policies, whether domestically or internationally. So in terms of examples of injustices, and I went to med school in the US. I left Ghana just after I finished my A-levels and started med school in the US. And I started to experience and note some of these injustices. And first, when I was experiencing them, at the time I experienced them, I did not consider them injustices. It was just supposed to be part of the hard life of growing up, right, of going through my career. But one of the things was being treated as if my presence in a certain space was a result of charity, that I didn't really belong, that I was there by accident, by charity, or by someone's good graces, and not the fact that I actually did belong there and actually could hold my own there, that I was to be perfect in order to be acceptable, or even to belong a little bit. And this was the kind of attitude I had from the advisor assigned to all pre-med students at my university, which was in the US, who, for someone like me who had maintained a very good GPA, I was on the dean's list every semester, and I had a single C on my transcript. You know, other than that, it was A's and B's. To look at my transcript with no level of being impressed at all. He looked completely unimpressed and just was expressing concern, which is full concern about the fact that I would ever even get into med school. It was very hurtful. And the thing was, I almost believed him. I almost believed him that no matter what I'd done, I wasn't going to go anywhere. But thankfully, I did not. And I applied to, you know, med schools everywhere and was able to go to a very, very good med school. So this is just the beginning. That was just the beginning. But I saw many more of this. And thankfully, having focused on African studies in my undergraduate learning, as imperfect as African studies could be, I learned a whole lot that gave me much more confidence to pursue the career that I wanted to, and pursued it the way that I wanted to pursue and practice it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nadia. And it's so interesting to note that medicine has just become, as a career, has just become accessible to, for instance, Black South Africans or South Africans of color post-independence, because previously it was the domain of whites only, and there were 1 or 2 med schools that took 10 or 20 medical students on board. And I recall I was fortunate to be able to study anatomy, and in the anatomy labs, students of color were only allowed to learn from pieces of cadaver that belonged to Black people, and white students were allowed on the Black cadavers. It was, now it sounds hilarious, but thank you for sharing that perspective.
Thank you.
Tian, I would like to hear from you also about your experience and your role in this current R&D ecosystem, but I know you have a wealth of experience when it comes to injustices in these systems. Over to you, brother.
Thanks, Leonard. Hello, everyone. The example you just, even in death, we are not colleague.
We're struggling a bit with your audio.
Is this better now?
It's still breaking up a bit here. Do you think it's your bandwidth? Would you want to try without the cam? I think Tian is logging back in. I will turn to Dr. Al-Haji with the similar question to share with us some of his personal experiences as well, and talk a bit about his role. Over to you, Al-Haji.
Thank you very much for having me. Can you get me clearly?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. My name is Al-Haji Njai, and for me, this has been a lifelong journey with, both starting to talk about decolonization and scientific racism, colonialism. This has been things that have been near and dear to me ever since I probably learned to grow up, because I grew up in a family that had very strong Pan-African roots, Pan-African movements, people who were pretty much involved in some of the Pan-African struggles across the continent, like from Sekou Touré to Amilcar Cabral to Kwame Nkrumah and others. So when I got into science and got to the US, for me, it was a realization of some of the things that I have grown to know about impacts of slavery, impacts of racism, and then impact of the wider colonialism globally. And so even as a student at Kalamazoo College, where I got a lot of liberal arts exposure, I was beginning to see some of the stark contrast between Blacks students and then white students. And coming from Africa, for me, I was caught in between these two forces. And to me, it was the most biggest sort of aha moment for me, in terms of beginning to understand what it means to be Black, what it means, what racism involves. And then as I went on to grad schools continued in Michigan and going into more science, you become, the number is starting to get smaller, the number of people who look like me. So I started, to experience a lot of this. But again, it has always been also the impetus for me to, to get back to Africa, because I've always believed firmly that we will talk about decolonization, the effects of colonialism, the effects of slavery for as long as possible. But we as Africans have to begin to take the lead in trying to change those narratives. And so I have, I started an organization, Project 1808, which largely focused on this issue of capacity, building, capacity, but not just the usual capacity, because in the one of our biggest challenge in Africa has been our own very education. And I'll talk about that later if I have more time, because the whole aspect of decolonization and colonialism is centered around our education and what education we are getting. And so, and that education continues to be our biggest challenge, and it continues to be the conduit, the vessel of entrenching the colonial system, even for the very people that we want to kind of liberate in some of those countries or to create the opportunities. And so I created my organization simply because I wanted to begin to mentor students around a decolonization pathway, not necessarily the traditional way they are thinking, but thinking about, science, thinking around indigenous science, indigenous methods. How do we empower our own methods, empower our own systems? How do we create a sense of self and identity? And then that then went on to the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone. I was one of the scientists who went back to Sierra Leone while, in fact, I got a lot of backlash, and some in a company I worked for, they actually wanted me to even make sure that it is not known to my other colleagues that I was responding to Ebola in Sierra Leone. And even when I wrote an op-ed on Ebola, I was reprimanded because, that should not be known that I actually was working. And here was me, I'm an infectious disease scientist, I'm an immunologist, and I was saying I was getting back to my country. People are dying, people are hopeless, and I'm trying to get back to do something for my community and my society and my people. And that partnerships that I developed actually ended up creating some of the biggest body of knowledge on Ebola, and also creating a vaccine that is that has gone through clinical trials. But I was shocked that someone will see that like something negative. So so for now and that's then created the impetus for me to continue I saw the need, I saw the essence of being here. It doesn't pay much to be in Africa. I lose a lot more of it, but I feel fulfilled every day that I am in the communities, I'm in the schools, I'm in the universities, and I'm trying to put that aspect of my own experience, but also creating a decolonization pathway for some of my compatriots in my country. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very informative statement. And it's really great, to hear about the actions that are being done to change things. We normally in these meetings, we share examples of how things have gone wrong, but it's so great when we hear about doing things and taking the initiative and making things actually work. I'm so glad that Tian has managed to join by phone. Tian, the floor is yours.
Hi there, Leonard. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly. Thank you.
Wonderful. You will just unfortunately be deprived of my face, but I trust my voice will provide equal value. Colleagues, really great to be here. Thank you so much. Always good to engage. We've been longtime advocates in this space, and we've always believed that you cannot meaningfully do work in HIV, SRHR, COVID, or any public health intervention and not be engaged in the R&D discourse. But of course, we also have to acknowledge that this discourse, colleagues, the R&D one, has also been spectacularly exclusive. It's been privileged, and it hasn't been mainstreamed across how we do advocacy. And so I think that's part of the core. But in this particular context of COVID, our R&D work at the African Alliance really looked at the current and planned African vaccine manufacturing ecosystem, which of course includes vaccine research, development, discovery, and manufacturing, and how we could learn lessons from our current experience, but also ensure that civil society learning and engagement happens as an essential pillar really for what we understand to be the place we want to work towards, which is decolonized vaccine sovereignty. But it also has a specific focus on ensuring that civil society and its leadership are equipped with the knowledge to meaningfully participate in vaccine-related R&D discourse, through a dedicated fellowship system. And this is a fellowship that we'll be launching in January, covering all 5 regions of the continent, specifically to grow a new generation of activists who have a deep passion and desire for not only understanding where we are with R&D, thanks Ethel, of not only where we are with R&D, but also understanding why the need to decolonize R&D is absolutely critical and urgent. at this point. So that's just in terms of where we come from and what we're doing. The other part of your question was how have we been impacted? You know, we've been witness, number one, you know, front of my mind, to just the amount of white non-Africans in leadership positions, you know, in HIV, in SRHR, in research and development, leadership positions. And so we need to be conscious of leadership and power and where that power lies, who has access to that power, and then how that power is used. You know, we have had clients who would ask us to walk with them on a journey towards decolonization, not tokenistic DEI. That's really been mainstreamed, you know, now as a checklist to silence critique of one's lack of appetite to shift the needle towards justice. But as we've been having those discussions, you know, we've had clients who would get upset when we would call a white man in leadership a white man. So in 2022, if we cannot name things, if we cannot name whiteness with the same ease that they have named and characterized and caricatured and weaponized Blackness for centuries, then what hope do we have on this journey for decolonization? Being called a white man is not a slur, it's a statement of fact and should be taken as an invitation to introspect, to sit with what that means. And more importantly, perhaps to sit with the discomfort of what you then need to do to be a sincere ally and start tackling your own colonization. That would be a step in the right direction as we speak about how decolonization manifests personally. So we can talk about decolonization in the abstract, but it can be overwhelming. And so we must start with the individual. That individual who was raised not to see color, that individual who was raised to not mention race except when they say human race, that individual who was raised to understand how white supremacy manifests in their daily life and begin that painful, painful work of denouncing and rejecting that power. Thanks.
Tian, thank you so much. And I'm so glad you were able to connect. Whenever I listen to you speak so passionately about this, I really want to write down and steal some of the phrases that you use. It's always so powerful. And we all know your passion as well. So the next question for the panel is, and I know we've been talking about this, and Prof. Binagwa has also talked about this, is why do we need to decolonize global health R&D, and what are the harms of this to our current system? And I think I will start with you, Nadia, if that's okay. Nadia, over to you.
Thank you, Leonard. So why do we, yes, thank you, Leonard. I hope you can hear me. So why do we need to do this? Because the status quo is not working. The status quo is not working for the R&D part and the benefits of R&D being truly distributed according to global health, equity, and justice principles. And the status quo is not working because there are a lot of people being harmed by the status quo. And so we have to, and then the system that the status quo was built on, because it is a system of colonization and white supremacy, it needs to be dismantled in the very painful process that Tian just talked about. Decolonization is painful work, so that people can benefit from the R&D that we are contributing to, because participation in clinical trials by so many Black people and by so many people who had done this, who have been doing this and who did this for HIV trials, is contribution to R&D, and that everybody needs to equally benefit from it, or equitably, let me use a better word, equitably benefit from it. But the status quo is not supporting that. And so that is why we need to decolonize the R&D process, and global health itself, which claims to work on on principles of equity and justice, actually needs to be decolonized itself, because it's not living to the standard that it's defined by. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. And can I move to Dr. Alhaji as well with the same question on why we need to decolonize health R&D and some of the harms of our current system?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we move towards decolonization of our R&D, and not just I think R&D. I think you know, decolonization is significant across the board. A lot of things are not working across the globe. A lot of things are not working in many you know, African countries because of sometimes painfully these legacies of you know, colonialism, systemic oppression, and others. And right now, as it is, there is a skewness with regards to knowledge, which knowledge is valued, you know, based on this. We've created this multicultural society, but in that multicultural society, there is clearly the dominant culture of power, and then there is the dominant cultures of marginalization. And so it has become this sort of one-way flow of information, one-way flow of resources. And then even when it comes to what knowledge is valued. So I think that we need to move on, because it's not just within the research and development. It has to take on the much bigger global aspect of knocking off colonialism in all the facets. You know, when we look at what is the setup at the moment globally, and when we are talking about decolonization, it becomes very difficult to even do when even the elites, the African elites, are trained within that colonial framework, right? It is very difficult for you know, a colonized mind, and someone who's also gone through the colonized Western educations that we have at the moment, to even begin to think that we can actually value our own systems, value our knowledge systems, value some of our own. And so, and clearly through colonialism to present, the universities, as we have them now in many parts of the world, including Africa, are still glued on to the same models. We are teaching the same thinking. Our curriculums are coming down, and there is no room, for instance, when you look at public health or global health, there is no room for African indigenous systems, methods. Where is the role of African music in soul and healing? And where is the African spiritualities? Where is the African deities in all of these processes that are actually, you know, when we take the grand scheme of public health and medicine, these are very relevant in most part of the cultures. We push vaccines into as the only panacea, but then we realize, okay, half of this continent, you know, didn't receive a jab on their shoulders, but they are still okay from the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet we don't want to put in resources into understanding what happened.
Alhaji, we lost you for a second. Do you hear us? I think we lost Dr. Alhaji for a second. He's probably logging back on. And he made many interesting points, especially around what colonial practices have done to health. And it's really evident the colonial system in Africa has been one of divide and conquer, which we all know about as well, with their practices not only in health, but in many aspects of African societies. Even when we look at things like medicines, regulatory authorities, and sharing health information, it's so fragmented across the continent. Only now are things, harmonization processes and a lot of sharing is taking place. And this all is a legacy of our colonial pasts. So I'm going to turn to Yvette with a similar question. Yvette, would you like me to repeat, or are you fine to go ahead? Over to you. You're on mute, Yvette.
Okay, I need to unmute. Thank you so much, Leonard, and for all the speakers. I think for me, we've seen this phenomena, and I'm just a little bit, concentrated on the fact around why are we not having the North in this discussion. I think it's time for us to plan on how we're really going to participate or not participate in research. And we've seen how often research is funded and led by scientists who arrive with a fully formed research question that does or does not address and disregard African people and our customs and our traditions. And when the research question and the answer comes from Africa and how it is seen. Case in point, I don't want to make this the Pavering Ring discussion, but we cannot. We are faced currently with that same problem where the research question came from Africa, came from South Africa, and the science shows the evidence. However, because the FDA has not approved the ring, it becomes a question. It's seen as a very inferior product. It's seen as our contribution to the research, to the science is inferior. And we can see how little impact or how little effect our local researchers have in these questions. We see how there's a total disregard of the bodies of women who participated. And even worse, the bodies of women who are saying, we want this tool. This tool is ours. We want it and we want it now. But, Leonard, in the reality of scheme of things, we also need to decolonize our own minds and decolonize how we do things and decolonize how we participate in the spaces. And I don't want to repeat what Tiane said, but for APA and the work that we do around community engagement is to ensure that our work is more than an item on the agenda, a tick box, a nice to have. The last item on the agenda, it has to be an engagement that stems from mutual respect. And we can only demand that mutual respect to be in the rooms where these decisions about our bodies are made, and how we have to demand the acknowledgement of the contribution of the Black bodies to science. I cannot reiterate this enough. And I think our colleagues in the scientific field, our PIs, need to also advocate for this point, to say no research in Africa will happen if it's only going to contribute to your own your academic fields and your academic accolades. Research needs to happen, and it can happen if it only contributes to the lives of African women. The Decolonization ring is criminal. What's happening currently is criminal, and women in Africa are not going to take that standing down. We are supposed to speak out of experience in the session, and my experience and my reality is the Decolonization ring. It is needed, it is wanted, women want it. However, the West is not okay with it. Cabaret, we get claps. We also want cabaret, but cabaret is not superior to the ring currently, especially in the evidence that is shown of how women take up HIV prevention options, and as well as the wealth of experience we have in family planning. We have to speak on issues that really impact us. We can no longer just be surfacey about the realities that we face as women in science, as Black people in science. It cannot continue this way. We have to flip the table, even if we are invited to the table. Thank you.
Yvette, thank you so much. And it's always inspiring to me when, and also comforting when we have people that are there to take up the fight and that are fearless to take up the fight as well. And we've seen more and more, and especially when I listen to the young people that you work with, you know, there's this hope that it wouldn't be like previous generations that let things just pass by and wait for others to tell you what to do. Wow, Yvette. I'm going to go back to Alaji. He's managed to join, and just give him a chance to complete his last statement.
Yes, and thank you so much. Sorry, I got with technology here. But as I was saying, we need to get out of this, vicious circle of dependencies and being, existentially tied to, donors or to research paradigms that are set out from the West. So, for instance, currently, as it is in Africa, you find that within the global health field, that African government and Africa, I work with the Ministry of Health. We are perpetually here in Sierra Leone tied to one workshop or the other. Scores, it's almost like you come in. There are these sets of scores that you have to, or indicators that you have to abide by, and then you are evaluated based on these indicators, and then and scored without necessarily countries having the flexibilities to actually create their own, and then being able to even achieve more. Who told you that we have to actually be boxed within those scores, those indicators like the JEEs that that has been set for different countries for themselves or to be evaluated on. And we've seen, even with the COVID-19, countries that were scored very highly on some of these scores did very poorly in terms of responding to the COVID-19. Some of the countries that are not doing well. But again, on a larger note, I think that to sufficiently decolonize, which is really critical for most countries in Africa, including Sierra Leone, it requires nothing short of a series of revolutions across these countries, because currently countries are held on these global economic systems, socio-economic systems, and there is this perpetual thing of dependencies, both in terms of knowledge, dependencies on the global north for knowledge, even for something as that should be the domain in Africa, tropical medicine, from which colonial countries got a lot of knowledge out of Africa, from malaria medicines to different other things. Nowadays, where do you go? Africans have to move out of Africa to go to London or go to the US to do tropical medicine. But you actually in the laboratory of this type of medicine, is this type of knowledge is all over within the African continent. Why are we doing that? So I think that for me, it's decolonization also goes with a series of revolutions in which we can have more knowledge revolution, where we are creating more knowledge from within Africa. Food security, it goes with other aspects of developing, industrial and technological thinking within the continent, but not necessarily the type of technologies that are being pushed to us at the moment, which is also another agent of colonialism at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's very interesting you bring up the point about schools of tropical medicine. And, you know, there are many prominent schools of tropical medicine that many people from formerly colonized countries aspire to attend. And if you go back and start reading the history of those schools and why those centers of education were established in the first place, it was to learn about these challenges in countries where we live and how to control the people there and how to make sure that their citizens were healthy when they came to our regions to take whatever and help themselves to whatever they wanted. So let's not forget that as well when we aspire to have those letters of those universities behind our names. I am going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to turn over to Tian. And Tian, I'm happy for you to answer that question, but also to cite examples and also talk about what decolonization looks like to you. So over to you, Tian.
Thanks, Leonard. You know, in terms of, just quickly, in terms of why we need to decolonize, I think, you know, many R&D advocates have come into R&D space quite late in life, and our history has been in the general sectors. But I do think that we need to begin to think about how we decolonize this sector in terms of R&D. You know, the sector has been shrouded in tech speak, economic analysis, and science. So our work here, I think, is cut out, and we need to disrupt the way we've been working. COVID has shown us that what is discussed in closed R&D groups, the agendas that are shaped in Geneva and London and DC, and how products that determine whether we live or die are programmed are not set by us. We do not have a definitive and authoritative voice in setting that agenda, no matter what we tell ourselves, and no matter how many community consultation reference Zoom calls we attend, hoping that our inputs will make it into a final draft. So we need to ask why. We need to ask the hard questions of how our appointed representatives, be they politicians or activists, have moved the needle for us. How have they agitated for change for us? And if those questions cannot be answered, we need to reset the system and reimagine what representation on bodies with power mean for us, and rapidly understand that having someone who looks like us, who is from us, will not automatically translate into our issues being raised, our voices being centered. We should be losing sleep over the lure and the power and the appeal of proximity to whiteness and everything that that brings. The truth is, resisting that lure is hard and can only be done when you have the personal conviction to do so, but also your village, your people, to be that wind behind your back, to stand up and resist the temptation to be satisfied by only a seat at the table, and to be the only so-called diverse one at that table. You know, I agree that our Global North partners must listen to this conversation, but we must also not be burdened by expending energy on begging and imploring folks to get it. At what point is responsibility taken for one's own actions or inactions, one's own need, if not desire, to develop a consciousness? Throughout this pandemic and before that, we have been forced to twist and contort ourselves into shapes to be palatable for support. We had to prove why we deserved vaccines. We had to prove why we need tests. We had to prove why we need a treatment. And on and on and on it went. But adding on to that list, we must also begin to realize that how we begin to understand this building of capacity is also around job security. The people, colleagues, that we are looking for to walk with us on this decolonization journey will have to work themselves out of a job. Our very existence and where we are right now, keeping us sick, keeping us in need of small grants and ad hoc technical support, keeping us grateful, is the reason they have their jobs. Where will they get their attendance registers from Kampala? Where will they get their selfies from a regional meeting in Zambia? Where will they get the covers of the report? Where will they be able to stand up in New York and DC and say, we consulted the Africans are with us, we are together? You might not see them because God forbid we pay them the same salary levels that we are on. So you might not see them, they're back at the ranch, but we here in Geneva, in DC and London, we are taking up this space. You know, something I think about frequently is what a colleague once said. How much different when you looked at the racism that unfolded over COVID, you know, specifically targeted at the WHO Director General. You know, someone said something so powerful to me that has stayed with me to this day. Imagine how different our response to COVID would be if Tedros Ghebreyesus from Asmara in Eritrea was actually Chad Parker from California. What would our pandemic have looked like then? what would it have looked like? So we must demand more. We must insist on more, because more is our right. It is our birthright. It's not a favor or something we wait to be given in solidarity. If the table needs to be turned upside down, let it be, because our dignity cannot wait to be agreed upon in the next version of the next strategy. We must take it. And when it is not there, we must have the courage to walk away and not give these systems the legitimacy that they can only get from us. Sorry, very quickly, I'll just cover what decolonization looks to us. You know, we give small grants of up to $25,000 to organizations that cause good trouble on the continent to advance health justice. And one of the ways we tried, it's not perfect, it's still a learning phase, we tried to decolonize our grant application system. So we dropped log frames, we dropped asking organizations to prove to us, you know, their 5 ancestors, their several relatives provide us, you know, proof of residences, all of these things that we, who started as a small NGO and are still a small NGO, felt were oppressive and felt that took away our passion and our energy. And so we've done this co-creation process with our grantees to understand and agree on broad principles, but let how the response is conceptualized and implemented be led by the partner. We are not there, we can't be there. So in our mind, decolonization looks like letting the people lead. It looks like a journal article with local lead authors. It looks like a donor-funded event without the donor logos on every pen, pad, and roll-up banner. It looks like colleagues from the global north not flying in to assist us with technical support, but stopping, insisting on using those resources to find a local provider to lead that skills sharing process. Practically, what you can do. So you can find the courage of your conviction, raise your voice, and question why you are being flown to a continent to provide support, a continent that is home to some of the world's best minds, strategists, thinkers, and change makers. And lastly, what decolonization looks like, it looks like not having to send concepts and approaches to London or Geneva for sign-off. It looks like a world where our voices are enough, full stop, our voices are enough. It looks like a world where we are able to say no to funding that alters our aims, dilutes our advocacy, and creates divisions. It looks like never stopping to see color. We must, no matter what they say, we must keep on seeing color. We must keep on seeing race, and we must keep on understanding how race shapes every single moment of our being and how it has been a determining factor in how we all today on this call and beyond have experienced our human journey and the dignity which did or did not shape that journey. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, my brother, comrade. I don't know if you're making me sad or angry or giving me goosebumps, or there's so much work to be done. And I know that, you know, some people feel that they are empowered, they're strong enough to carry this work forward and do something. You know, we all attend these discussions and we are all talking about this. We've always been talking about it. Let's just not say that organizations have now prioritized this. Maybe they've given these things titles, or maybe they've put this as part of their KPAs, the DEIs, and the decolonization. We've always lived it, and we've always been trying to fight the system in whatever aspects of our lives. So, but we sometimes think, what can we do, you know, within the organization that we work with? Little things, or maybe even bigger things. And one thing that really irks me is when people come and say, wow, this DE&I, please come and please share some readings, you know, that I can do, or please can you advise me? There's a wealth of knowledge on the internet, person. Go and educate yourself, you know. So for my last question to pose to the panel is, what should we be doing in our organizations today? Or maybe in that clinical trial environment that we work at? Or maybe when we're talking to communities that we work in? What are some elements that we can do to change the status quo? And I'm gonna hand over to Alhaji, and I think you would also like to tell us a little bit more about your program. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think, you know, there is a lot that we can do. So for me as a scientist and someone also who believes in, you know, practical, you know, a pragmatic approach to things, I believe that, you know, we can be doing things in our communities, in our continent, in our countries, to change the trajectory of things. I started my organization, Project 1808, in Wisconsin, Madison, at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And over the years, I came to Sierra Leone, started with a small number of students that I had in my organization. And I wanted, because it's an idea around decolonization and changing mindset, I wanted to go down to their initiating period. So I started from primary school, level 3, going down to recruit them. Science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics, and all that things. And creating a mentorship program. And today, I'll say we have over 1,000 students being mentored, but also within this process also, that I also uncovered that how about if I tackle the most significant thing around decolonization is the education system, the universities. How if I'm able to create a college or a university within Sierra Leone that can be solely focused on a decolonization curriculum and beginning to come with ideas around decolonization that has not been practiced in the classroom before and beginning to practicalize them. And so that's the mission that I've been doing here in Sierra Leone, which now I will say fingers crossed. We are about 2 months or so away from getting accreditation to start this institution in Sierra Leone, where we are going to be, for the first time, going radical with regards to education. Because when I say radical with regards to education, it's about really rethinking what education is from the African lens. Are we telling our own African stories? Is our African music, African dance, African spirituality? Is it in our farmers coming to the classroom? Our farmers who have a vast knowledge in agriculture, soil systems, and all those other aspects. How are we calling them lecturers in our cultures, in our societies, as people of custodians of knowledge in this domain? How are we getting that? And so many other aspects of things. But it's also about us as intellectuals putting ourselves out there and ready to confront the existing paradigms and challenging them, and also making sure that our students are able to understand the concept that we are teaching within a decolonized curriculum. But I definitely say that whatever we are going to be doing, and which I'm still working on various aspects now, I train in Sierra Leone researchers on scientific writing and technical writing. We have these programs that happen every 3-4 months with the universities and other organizations. And I think all of those activities are helping to increase the number of researchers who are interested not just in research, but also just telling their stories, and I manage the Sierra Leone Journal of Biomedical Research here in Sierra Leone, where we are actively going out to engage young researchers from the university levels and down to the grassroots level to be able to just submit and tell their stories, because the knowledge doesn't have to reside in big publications that are out there. We have to start documenting our own stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So in the interest of time, I know there's so much to talk about. I would like to call on our panelists for a final comment. Dr. Nadia, you're welcome for some parting words.
Sure, thank you, Leonard. So, and thank you to all my panelists for the excellent points that they've made. What I'd like to say is that, in terms of moving this forward, start with yourself. Check your assumptions, check your microaggressions, because all of this happened as part of what we allow because of systemic colonial white supremacy systems, or systems built on those ideologies. Who and what do you value the most in R&D? Is that in any way due to geography and or race? And if so, why? I have I train people to do research in Nigeria and in other West and Central African countries. We have a group called the Central and West Africa Implementation Science Alliance. Apart from training on the regular research, writing and all that, we're also training leaders of research as Africans, and they're all Africans, to not have to shrink themselves, or interface in Western countries or Westerns, or what they know, and subsume what they know and the value of what they know locally, or how they've been taught locally, to what is set out there that is valued in terms of white supremacy. And I understand that this is how we've been socialized and this is how we've been taught, but part of my training programs that I'm working with other Africans to do is a system of unlearning as we teach them. So unlearning is part of the dismantling process that needs to happen with decolonization. So first, check with yourself, check your assumptions, and then learn to not shrink yourself. We have to unlearn some of the things we take as natural or normal. And move on with that and teach other people to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yvette Raphael.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leonard. And my parting words is insist that the scientists and the PIs look like the populations they are researching. I'm in the engagement space, and that is one of the things I think we should take back. We should get over, as Black people, we should get over the being first and the being only one at the table syndrome. It is no longer cute. It is no longer fun. Take other people with you as you go. Take other women, take other young people, take other Black people with you. It is no longer cute. We should demand that the research participants are reimbursed adequately. I get a heart attack every time I hear science talk about we give them transport money. We know that is not why white people take part in research. We know that we are selling out our communities. We know that is not how it's supposed to be done. So from a community engagement point of view, and how I would see ourselves decolonizing our space, me, my comrades, my colleagues globally and in the world, is insist that the engagement is meaningful, insist that the engagement is fair, transparent, insist that people do tell us the truth of why research is being done. I mean, how unfair is it for Silungile somewhere in KZN to only be part of a research study or a trial because she just cannot have a PhD, a master's, but she's done the work for years. We need to insist that community researchers be part of the research that we are doing. That's the only way we will decolonize the space. And please stop creating red tapes for Black women and Black people in research. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. And Tian, comrade, you're going to forgive me now, but in the interest of time, and we really loved every word that you said earlier. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to end our panel and move over to our final keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker, I'm very honored to introduce a friend and comrade, Dr. Vuyiseka Dubula. Vuyiseka's voice and strength has been at the forefront of HIV treatment and activism for more than 2 decades. And those of you who have seen her at the recent Montreal IAS conference will know her voice, and you will know what VU stands for. Please see her Twitter profile. It also tells you she speaks what she thinks. She's not scared to speak her mind. Over to you, Dr. Dubula.
Thank you, Leonard. You're putting too much pressure on me. Am I audible?
Omandla, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
So, comrades, I am really speechless, because all of you have summarized, said how I feel, how uncomfortable I am, but at the same time, also feeling like, you know what, we've conquered so many oppressions in our lives in Africa. And I think this is one of those things we need to conquer in our lifetime. For those of us who are in the forefront, who are in the front lines, here is the challenge. And Prof. Agnes said it so well, that racism is the backbone of this colonial gaze on Africa. And Africa's dependence on the North in the sense of resources is highly problematic. But at the same time, we know that the North stole from Africa, and now we have to go and beg for that money to come back where it belongs, where it was taken in the first place. And our health inequalities in Africa are driven by the fact that we don't have the resources, but also we live in such poor conditions, yet our R&D or our contribution to R&D is not valued. When I say our contribution to R&D, I'm saying it within our own standards, not necessarily by the standards of the North. We know what we've done for HIV. We've shown the world and the North that Africans are not just going to wait and perish with HIV, they are going to fight back. We challenged systems that many people thought that, you know, the political economists thought that you cannot break that structure. The ceiling is set. You can only achieve certain things by your toys. We showed them that it can be done. We also have continued to challenge the same gaze in terms of access to vaccines with COVID. But we are exhausted because we keep going back disease by disease, condition by condition. We have to go back and fight for each condition. We fought for HIV treatment. We fought for TB treatment. We fought for COVID vaccines. Why must we fight for each disease, fighting the same system? Because basically we're going back to the international treatment patent rights, which are continuously becoming one of the biggest barriers to access to medicines. But we keep going back to the same structures that prevents many of us from accessing the best medicine available or best vaccines available. At the same time, COVID also showed us and told us that our indigenous contribution to research and development has been erased, but at the same time, it also became a backbone to support communities that did not have any medicines or anything to fall back on during COVID. As Prof said from Sierra Leone, said not many people didn't have vaccines in Africa, yes, and we are still very far from the same doses that others in the North have access to, but people didn't die in the same numbers because we have a third system. We have the indigenous traditional system that it has been erased, but still exists for centuries. It still exists, and many of us resorted to it. I remember myself in 2020 when I had COVID, there were no options but traditional medicines. But if we talk about research and development today, are we referring to Western medicines, research and development, or are we talking about both indigenous and the West coexisting in Africa because they coexist in reality? But of course, comrades, we have to be honest. This uncomfortable conversation about decolonizing health, research and development in Africa makes many white activists, make many white people uncomfortable. But if we are not having that conversation now and waiting for people to be uncomfortable, when can we have the conversation? Because people are dying. Africa needs, for once and for all, we do not need permission of the North or the West to have this conversation because the shoe is eating us. We are the ones who are wearing that shoe and having blisters and having to walk on that small shoe with those blisters. Africa must claim its space, its rightful place in the research and development discourse and hold firm of its power and not let go. Otherwise, we are going to continuously going back to the North, asking for permission to develop this drug and that drug, to develop this vaccine and that vaccine. And that has shown us that it is not sustainable. And also, when we do that, we also have to realize that power that Africa must get hold of is the fact that we have now, for many years, Africa been made the lab or the laboratory of the North. My comrade Yvette spoke about many others, amongst those products developed or clinical trials done in Africa, because we are seen as the lab. When the product is done and completed, in the case of Kebele, cabotegravir, long-acting injectable for PrEP, conducted here in Africa, but when it's ready, proved that it works from black and brown bodies, when it's time for us to access the same thing that was developed or tested in our bodies, we are not worthy of access. After the research is done, the medicine is sold at the highest price, unattainable to the same bodies that the drug or the product was developed or proved from. Is this the first time we're hearing this? No. The same thing happened with HIV treatment. HIV treatment trials were conducted in Africa, but when the drugs were available, we were told we were too poor to be treated. But we were not too poor for clinical trials to be conducted in our bodies. Deep down, that is racism, because they want to make money using our bodies. They are tired of using our forefathers as slaves. They are using modern day slavery, using research as the new form of slavery, because Africa is caught sleeping. Africa is still waiting for permission. Who must give us that permission for us to move? The other part that I think is part and parcel of the solution, again, Prof. Agnes alluded to this. If we are not planning to train our researchers, as also Comrade Tian alluded to this, if we are not planning to attract and maintain researchers to stay in Africa and develop this agenda in Africa, we are constantly going to go back to the North, because we ourselves, those of us who are trained from public money in Africa, also go to the North to get training in the North and stay in the North, and we forget about Africa. So universities also have a role to play to train and to produce the needed technical skills for this agenda for Africa to work. We have to shape our own health research agenda for our own Africa's problems. Because often some of this agenda, the research that comes from the North and the knowledge that comes from the North, it does not always fit with our problems or the way in which we frame our problems. Because the North comes in Africa as a visitor, goes back home, becomes an expert, and comes back to implement again the same notion of thinking that they know what they're talking about. They have never stayed here longer than 6 months or longer than a year. Those of us who have stayed here for all our lives, we were born here, know what we need and what solutions do we need for our own problems. So we have to encourage an intra-Africa research collaboration and fund it. We have to build capacity beyond just the researchers, those of us who are we call ourselves scientists. Scientists in this way, where it only belongs to the elite, to those who have PhDs and those who have masters and those who have postdocs. It will never take Africa to the place where I call Canaan. We will never get to the place of honey and milk if we are only going to always produce 2%, 5% of PhDs once in 5 years and think that we will build the intellectual capacity for us to be able to reach the gap in terms of research and development. It will never happen. So again, it speaks to what Yvette has said. We need to build capacity and support where research is already happening in the community, in the third sector. There is a lot of research happening in civil society, but it's not valued equally. It's not funded equally. Activists are scientists. They are scientists in different forms, because some of us are scientists in implementation, some are scientists in developing products, some are scientists in proving a concept in the lab. So we have to diversify the way in which we are training and building that capacity and that technology for Africa to really build its own intellectual capacity for research and development. So at the core of it, there is capacity that needs to be built so that people don't think that you can only be a researcher only if you've been trained at the O'Neill Institute or you've been trained at, for example, been trained by Yale or any other, Johns Hopkins. There is research that can be done and researchers that can be trained in Africa. We have institutions, we have capacity. Let's believe in our own institutions. The second thing that I want to challenge us on in closing is that Africa has to also have its own agenda on having its own ownership, in this case, its own patents. So if the current research and development has failed in bringing lasting reform to address inequalities in Africa, particularly health inequalities, and intellectual property rights still mean, in its current form, they are very colonial in terms of who has access to the best products available. Africa cannot, and it can't, that we are okay with holding less than 2% of patents, despite carrying 25% global burden of disease. Because at the moment, the diseases are in Africa, the patents are somewhere else to cure or treat or manage the diseases of Africa. If we have the volume in terms of people, if we have the populations, why can't we have the solutions to treat our own conditions? So there has to be a very imaginative, visionary target to move beyond 2% because 2% is not enough. Otherwise, we are creating the same problem by not aspiring to a 10% or 20%, even a 25%. So Africa must lead its own and fund its own research and development. We need to be very intentional in building this commercial sector of research and development science to boost our own local production. We can't have another pandemic hitting us without a plan. Are we waiting for another Ebola? Are we waiting for another COVID for us to boost our own local production? How is Africa going to use this opportunity to grow its own economy at the same time producing its own active pharmaceutical ingredients? So if things like, for example, the dapivirine ring developed in Africa are undermined by the North, who did we develop the dapivirine ring for? We developed it for African women. So to hell with the institutions in the US, but at the same time, yes, we can say to hell, but there are people in the US who also need the dapivirine ring, who will not have access to it because we did not just want the dapivirine ring just for African women. We want African women living in Africa. It's African women, it's all women everywhere who need choices. And that is one of the choices. So at the core of this, also we have to talk about how are we planning to produce active pharmaceutical ingredients, because that has been forever the issue where we can say, ha, 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 oh, but where are the active ingredients coming from? They are coming from the North. That's where they are holding their power. How are we planning to get out of that situation and that dependency? The other thing I want to raise is that, and I think all of us have spoken about funding, there is chronic lack of Africa investment in research and development. For me, that shows lack of priority in this area. By our own governments, by our own institutions, particularly the research institutions. Why is this the case? That our domestic contributions to research and development remains dismal. Yet we complain. Whenever there's COVID, there's TB, there's HIV, we complain about the same thing, yet we are not investing and making research and development one of the key important investments in getting ourselves out of the dependency from the North. Because a bulk of research and development today is funded internationally. That is part and parcel of the problem why the North sees us in this particular way. But again, on the other side, as I said, it's our money. We want our money to go back where it was taken. It's our gold, it's our diamonds that were stolen from generations. We want that money to come back. But at the same time, we know the reality is that that money is not going to come back clean. It comes with conditions and it comes with a lot of problems. So we also don't want to depend on the Western savior forever. So we have to build our own money and our own contribution to fund research and development and have a clear target, 2% is no longer enough. So if we don't invest in research and development for Africa, then it means we are happy with the colonial rules that protects the Western economic interest, the extraction from our bodies, the superiority of research and development, because at the moment, it looks like the West sees itself as the best, sees itself as they have every right to come and sell their medicines here at their prices. They have every right to use our bodies for clinical trials and take those drugs and sell them somewhere else where people can afford, because we are not investing in our own research and development. So the West gets rich while we die. And our governments have to realize that the economic growth of Africa also must come from this field. And our universal healthcare coverage will be solved also by research and development. So if we don't have new products coming from Africa in the next 10 years, we are not going to grow economically. We also are not going to reach our own targets to treat and make sure that everybody gets access to essential medicines. So in closing, we need a clear path to reform, because at the moment, the current status quo is not holding. We are exhausted at toying for each disease. We need to be brave. In that bravery, not sell each other out. And I think comrades have said this very clearly, that if you are the only person in the room who looks like me, you need to walk out. If you are the only person who keeps getting perpetual grants just because you are associated with a particular institution from the North, you need to walk out. Because by this time, we can no longer accept the one person and the first person and the first Black African scholar. That shit must fall. Because it's 2022 now. It should be in masses that we are all on that table. We should all be funded from that same institution that you've been funded for 50 years and you seem to be okay. But I mean, comrades who are from South Africa will know that a lot of these institutions we are talking about are also led by white people in Africa. So we also have to take that level notch down by also calling out the shit that happens, the white privilege that happens in these institutions, in our own African institutions. Just because people are from Africa doesn't mean there is no racism in Africa. So we also have to call out that shit also. We have to have courage to push back. We have to have courage to hold our governments accountable for lack of research and development in Africa, because we are exhausted of toy-toying. Thank you so much. And thanks to all comrades. And I'm really inspired from all the speakers who have spoken today.
Wow. What a way to cap the week that has been. John, you are silent. Everyone is silent. Yes, a lot of heavy truths, a lot of soul searching. I've been posting, like the nuggets that come up. The need for us to work in solidarity, to address issues in solidarity. The need for us to walk together so that we walk far and not walk alone, so that we are seen to be fast and to be the first. So yes, John, I'm going to hand it over to you so that you may wrap up and close us out on what has been a truly powerful conversation on decolonization of health R&D. John.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I would like to bring my colleague Sharon, because we need to talk about all of these powerful words, these inspiring words. What are the next steps? What do we do from here? What actions do we take? And I would hand it over to my colleague Sharon for a way that we all can participate and we all can continue this conversation towards action. Sharon?
Yes, hi, John. I'm so inspired, and I just want to thank all of the panelists, Professor Bingawago, Vu. We really just appreciate all of your powerful words. As a Jamaican American, I sent a little video to my comrades organizing this session yesterday from Bob Marley and his song where he said, "Until the philosophy that holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently dismantled and discredited, there will always be war." And I believe that very strongly. I am the co-chair, along with Julian, of the Global Health Technologies Coalition Equity Working Group, which just got stood up this year. We are committed to tackling these issues of injustice. We are opening this working group to the public. Usually the GHTC working groups are for its members. We are focused on all of the issues of equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and decolonization. We have a big battle in front of us. We know that there are entrenched ways of doing this work, and we are hoping to make some change by dismantling these entrenched ways of doing the work. So we're hoping to host 2 to 3 follow-on convenings and start to make some real progress on shaking up this whole entire system. So please join us. There is a link in the chat to join the listserv and to join our meetings, but this work will continue, and I look forward to working with all of you on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. This is one way that we can put words to action, right? This week has been full of inspiring, sometimes depressing, but overall powerful ways that we can increase domestic resource mobilization investment, allow research agendas to be African-led, research to be conducted by Africans, conceived by Africans for advancement of the health of Africans, right? This is important. Next steps. Sharon provided an excellent next steps. We will be coalescing all of these recordings, all of these slides, all of the links that have been shared throughout this week. This is the first annual Africa Health R&D Week. It's not going to be the last. And we thank you for joining us. We thank you for participating. And one other thing, the CASPER Coalition, along with other coalitions from AVAC, will be setting up a learning collaborative specifically talking about domestic resource mobilization with advocates from all different sectors, not just the health sector. As we saw in day 2, we need to engage tax justice advocates. We need to engage debt relief, debt cancellation advocates in order to advance this work. And we need to continue to talk about decolonizing this whole process, this whole enterprise. Because without decolonization, without anti-racist principles, without dismantling white supremacy, all of this is much harder, right? And we need to come together in this movement. The whole point of this week was to build a coalition, build a movement, a continental movement. I think we've done that. Now we move into action. Ethel, do you have any last words?
I think you've said it, John. The whole point of this week was for us to get started, to build a continental movement. And a movement is what we need. We need to be active. We need to be collaborative. We need to take action, really. No more talk. So join us. When we send out the links to the videos and to the recordings and all the links to the resources that have been shared in the chat, we will also send that reminder to join the collaborative and also keep you posted about where we are moving as Africa Health R&D Week in future. Thanks.